for me, coming here is to have a clear sense of direction of where EU policy is going to go going forward, especially within the context of the Cotonou Convention, which is now being dissolved and being dovetailed into the various African, Caribbean, and Pacific regions. So for me, it's interesting to hear about the Agenda 2035 of the European Union, where they begin to place emphasis on inclusivity within the electoral system and in terms of the participation of women, especially in the political process. INEC was among one of the first CMBs in Africa to develop a gender policy, and I'm proud to be part of that process because that is what I first worked on when I joined the Democratic Governance for Development project of the UNDP in January 2014. I was the one who edited the entire policy, and it was adopted towards the end of 2014, and it remained a model for African EMB in terms of development of gender policy. Within the Commission itself, we have tried to apply this policy in terms of employment, in terms of recruitment of electoral staff, in terms of promotions to key positions within the Commission. But within the larger political setup, it still remains a little challenging because Nigeria does not have a gender equality bill, and efforts at gender mainstreaming is still facing a lot of political pushback as a result of cultural and religious sensitivities. Those are all things that we need to work around. We need to definitely increase and deepen women participation, not only in the political and electoral process as voters, but also as candidates and also as in executive and appointive positions in government. Sometime along my career, I did a comparative study about the development trajectory of Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. And one of the key differences was the providing education for women in Southeast Asia, and of course providing opportunities for them within the political space. Those two issues proved extremely important in the developmental phenomenon that we saw in Southeast Asia in terms of family nutrition, in terms of sanitary conditions, in terms of even assisting the children to do some of their homework when they are back from school. Those are little things that make a difference in the development trajectory for Southeast Asia and for Sub-Saharan Africa. We are currently doing the review, the root and branch review, we call it, of the 2019 general election to know what worked, what did not work, what were the challenges, what were the opportunities. This is starting from bottom up, from the electoral officers who are the managers of the elections at the local level. And this will build up to state level debriefing and to the national debriefing. But tentatively, one could say a major take on the election is the level of acceptance of the outcome among Nigerians. I dare say this is probably the first election where I am not sure there have been any report of post-election violence or killing. I think for me, that is a major takeaway of the maturing nature of Nigerian democracy and the willingness of the political actors to seek judicial intervention and adjudication instead of resorting to self-help in protesting electoral outcomes. Unfortunately, the number of women in the legislative houses declined somewhat And I think we must do something about this, either through affirmative action or through the passage of the Gender Equality Bill, advocacy with the political parties to sponsor women as candidates, or through an executive bill to Parliament, designating a certain percentage of positions to women. But definitely something has to be done about the declining participation of women and their electability into the legislative houses. Of course, in terms of appointment to executive positions, I think the executive should also compensate the women. Because if you look at the register of voters, women constitute about 50% of registered voters in Nigeria. And anybody who has a hold on that constituency is in a good position to get elected as a president or as a senator or as a governor. So there is definitely an opportunity for politicians, for the political parties, to cultivate the votes of women through various affirmative strategies that can give them a sense of belonging and a sense of participation within the political and electoral processes. I worked on political conditionality somewhere in my career, and I did quite an incisive work, especially on European Union political conditionality, in using aid as an instrument in promoting democracy and good governance. That is from the theoretical side. I'm now on the practical side. And my comparison is that experiences differ from country to country, depending on the capacity of the government to fund election as a sovereign responsibility. For some, they can. For some, they can't. For some, they can to some extent, and some to some degree. For our case in Nigeria, electoral support constitutes perhaps less than 5% of the total electoral budget. You may say that is not much, but it is significant in terms of its impact, especially in three key areas. For example, within the Commission, there are areas of need that we may not have envisaged in drawing up the election budget. Electoral assistance prove useful in filling that gap. Also, secondly, there may be some training and capacity building opportunities that we are not aware of, and this is brought to our attention by third parties. And of course, we may not have budgeted for this, or we may not have sufficient budget for this. Electoral assistance help cover this gap. Lastly, and most importantly, as you know, there will never be sufficient fund for civic and voter education. And sometimes these funds from electoral support come in handy to augment our political, civic, and voter education campaigns in various aspects. For example, for the 2019 election, we undertook what they called the Youth Vote Count, where we went around 6 university campuses in the 6 geopolitical zones of the country. This was supported by ECES with the EU SDGN fund, in which we animate young people about the importance of registering to vote. And quite interestingly, the turnout for registration and the turnout to vote was impacted upon by these activities. Those are areas, little as they may be, that electoral assistance works, but you cannot measure their impact in terms of dollars and cents, but it engages the citizens, it animates them to engage with the political process. And of course, apart from the direct engagement with the Electoral Commission, Electoral assistant is extremely useful for civil society organizations in terms of election observation activities. They actually, to extent, depend on election support funds to be able to undertake their domestic activities in terms of election. And of course, this increases the credibility of the elections. It gives the citizens more confidence in the outcome of the elections because at least they have an independent opinion on the election and its processes and procedures apart from the one that they see themselves.